Welcome back, you wonderful and amazing people. I'm G. This is G on what? Today we're going to talk about something that we've all been experiencing for the past couple of years. We're going to talk a little bit about the pandemic. It's been an incredibly polarizing issue. Right now there's anti-mandates going on around, rallies going on around the world. You have the crazy trucker convoy going across Canada. They're now in the capital of Ottawa. So it's going on all over the world right now, and it's been an incredibly polarizing issue. Now, I don't want this to be a vaccine, anti-vaccine debate. That's not what this is about. It's been an incredibly polarizing issue, folks. It's been very divisive. It's divided families. It goes beyond nations and borders and religions because it affects us all. It affects every individual on the planet. So the people that need to be looking at this, that are in charge, tend to recently censor a lot of any opposing viewpoint of their narrative. A lot of doctors, very extremely reputable doctors, have been censored on this, and the world needs to look at information. So guys, I'm not a doctor. I'm not here to tell you what to do medically, but I do have a lot of information on stuff. Since this came out, I had a very difficult time getting started and where to start on this. There's so much info. And again, I'm not a doctor. I'm not here to tell you what to do medically. This is not a vaccine or anti-vaccine debate. But I am a person that looks at logic, facts, reason, scientific and critical thought, which I know is not commonplace as of late. So I like to look at facts, and I didn't know where to start, so I figured, why don't we just start at the beginning? So in the beginning, not that beginning, but the beginning of the pandemic, the official narrative started as it came from a wet market in China. And it jumped species through bat soup or somebody being there. They said it jumped species there, which is a lie, viable. It has happened in the past through other diseases, so we know it can happen. But also right up the road, about 10 miles back or so, is the Wuhan Institute of Virology, also known as WIV in a lot of the articles and from a lot of the doctors. If you hear anybody refer to that, that's what they're referring to. They're about 10 miles up the road, and they just happen to study these same type of viruses that we're happen to be dealing with right now. So it is a coincidence. So the official narrative said that it was nature versus the lab leak. So let's just look at some stuff from the beginning. What happened in the beginning? Well, in the start of it, there was Dr. Li Meng Yan. And so what she said that it came from a lab in China and that the government knew about it, and the WHO knew that it had person-to-person transmission. And she claimed to work for the University of Hong Kong School of Public Health. And you can look her up on Wiki, and there's a ton of different videos and interviews with her. She came forth in April of 2020, and she said that she had gone to her boss, who was the Chinese liaison to the WHO, and she had let him know that she felt that this had possibly come from a lab, along with a couple other doctors that she had been working with. And so one of the doctors, now these are her claims, one of the other doctors was threatened with violence and then just redacted statements and just disappeared and didn't want to talk about it. And that the other one had their lab shut down. And these were, reputable doctors in China that agreed with her statement that it came from a lab, that there was evidence for it. So after not hearing back, she was then claimed to have been threatened by her Chinese representative of WHO. Said, look, you need to stop talking about this, or, other things are going to happen. These were her claims, threats of violence. So she fled to the U.S., and then she came out and started doing some interviews, which you can find all over if you do a simple search, and I'll leave some links to her wiki and some of the searches. Now, the Chinese government and the WHO deny her claims and said she only did postdoctoral work there, and so there's a debate about it. And then we had Anthony Fauci and Francis Collins from the NIH, and they have their claims. Now, here's a little video from them.
But some questions raised about some of them, and I want to get you on the record addressing some of them. There was an email sent to you from an executive at EcoHealth Alliance, and this is one of the companies that funded some of the research at the Wuhan lab. And this email thanked you for basically saying you believed that the origins of the coronavirus were natural. This email said, quote, I wanted to say a personal thank you on behalf of our staff and collaborators for publicly standing up and stating that the scientific evidence supports a natural origin for COVID-19 from bat to human spillover, not a lab release from the Wuhan Institute of Virology. That email was April 18th. Now, there are some of your critics who say this shows you have too cozy of a relationship with the people behind the Wuhan lab research. What do you say to that?
Oh, that's nonsense. I don't even see how they get that from that email. That email was sent to me from them. I have always said, and will say today to you, John, that I still believe the most likely origin is from an animal species to a human, but I keep an absolutely open mind that if there may be other origins of that, there may be another reason. It could have been a lab leak. I believe if you look historically, what happens in the animal-human interface, that in fact, the more likelihood is that you're dealing with a jump of species. But I keep an open mind all the time. And that's the reason why I have been public that we should continue to look for the origin. That email, in no way, you can misconstrue it however you want. That email was from a person to me saying, thank you for whatever it is he thought I said. And I said that I think the most likely origin is a jumping of species. I still do think it is, at the same time as I'm keeping an open mind that it might be a lab leak.
Which is where this started. Now, is it a fair criticism to say that you were dismissive of the lab theory early on and that now you are more open to it? And if it is fair, why did you change?
It's not entirely fair, Chris. You know, when this virus first emerged, all of us at NIH were deeply engaged in studying its genome, its letters and its sequence to try to understand what its connection was with previous viruses. And we could see it was a bat virus that looked a lot like one that had been found in a cave in China 7 or 8 years earlier, but it had a lot of differences. Then the theory began to be put forward. Well, maybe it's human engineered. Maybe it's an intentional bioweapon that has been put together with the intention of killing people. That theory really didn't hold up. You could look at the letters of the RNA code and say, no human would have come up with this. That was rather widely spread. The idea that it might have been an accidental leak from the lab, on the other hand, always seemed sort of a dark and unfortunate idea, but not one you could rule out. And today we cannot rule that out. And we know there have been other instances, including in China, where leaks have happened by accidents.
But why are you more opening? Why are you guys calling for an investigation into it now? And just to be fair, you know, even on Fox News, one of the guys was interviewing you about this, and you said, look, I reject the bioweapon part. And, you know, you were told this isn't about a bioweapon. It's just about it happening in a lab. Why are you more open to that suggestion now? Do you think you'll ever know the answer?
I would not say I'm significantly more open than I was last summer when we began to worry about that as a real possibility. But there was so much swirl going on in other areas that probably didn't come to attention. I didn't go to a microphone and announce that. Do I think we'll ever know the answer? Well, we really need an evidence-based, expert-driven investigation. That's going to require China to be willing to let investigators look into the lab records, find out what happened in late 2019 in terms of the first cases, including those people who got sick in the lab, and get to the bottom of this. Without that, you know, Chris, we don't know any more about this theory really than we did a year ago. So for people now to say, oh, well, it's emerging as a likely explanation, it hasn't really. It's going to require more data before anybody could say that. I still think the most likely explanation is this was a natural transmission from a host bat, maybe something else in between, to humans, but I can't prove that either. We need to know the answer. We haven't got the evidence yet to say.
So there we have Dr. Fauci and Dr. Francis Collins, their thoughts on it. And those were roughly a year, well into a year into the virus, into the pandemic. So that was their statements on it. Now, it's very interesting that they state that. And I want to bring up something that is called the Proximal Origins paper. And let me click over to this. Check this out right here. So the Proximal Origins SARS-CoV-2, this is the official paper that came out. It has all the info on it, everything that they stated as far as it coming from natural sources. They give all the test data, everything. You can research this on your own. And this came out in March, I believe. Yes, March 17th of 2020. Okay, so I want you to look at this name right here, Christian G. Anderson, and along with Robert Gary. Those two names are pretty important. Now, they're the authors of this paper initially. Now, the first draft of this paper, when it was handed to Dr. Fauci and Francis Collins, was given to them on February 1st, 2020. So a little bit, about a month and a half before this, was the first draft. These are all the authors of this. Now, you would think that if this is their ideas, that it came from nature, it was their idea, and this test and study proves that. This is what came out in March of 2020, after the first draft went to Dr. Fauci and Dr. Collins, who were approving it. And then this was the final draft that came out. Now I want to jump over to these gentlemen right here, and I want to show you something called the CREID grant. Now, this is right off the NIH's website. You can go right to their website and find it. I'm going to show you some really awesome stuff. And to find out any more of this info that I'm about to give to you, you just go right here under grants and funding and you can research all this stuff. It's all public information. It's all publicly made available. Okay, so these guys right here, this was established by the NIAID. They intend to provide approximately $82 million over the next 5 years. Now, the NIAID is primarily funded by the Department of Defense. Now, this is the Centers for Research in Emerging Infectious Diseases. Okay, in the first year, they gave away 11 grants, approximating $17 million. And Dr. Fauci is the head of this, the CREID Foundation. Now, it's very interesting because I gave you the date for that. I gave you the date for the paper as being March. Well, the first draft was on February 1st, 2020. Well, also on February 1st, 2020 now, that's been revealed through the Freedom of Information Act and a lot of those emails and a lot of the correspondences that have been coming out over and over and over, and you can research these on your own. You can find that Dr. Christian Anderson, one of the authors of the Proximal Origins paper right here, Dr. Christian Anderson and Dr. Robert Gary, along with Dr. Michael Farzan, in a teleconference with Dr. Fauci and Dr. Francis Collins, all three of them said they were 60 to 80% sure that what they were finding came from a lab. But yet, on the same day, these guys released this paper. The first draft of this paper came out on February 1st, the same day. And you can go back and you can research the origin of both of those dates. It's all been put out in all the documents that have come out now. So that's a little funny. You would think that if these two guys authored a natural origins paper and story, that teleconference view would match up to the same data, but in the teleconference, they are quoted as saying that it was 60 to 80% sure that it came from a lab. And Dr. Robert Gary, in another interview, came out and said that it was an interview with The Intercept, came out and said that he was given restrictions on what they could say and what they should write, and they should not write that it came from a lab. And you can go back and check out that interview as well. But what's really interesting about all of that is these CREID grants. Where did they go to? Now, the CREID Foundation was created in April, I believe. August. I'm sorry, August. It was created in August. Now, what's interesting is that Donald Trump decreased funding to anything that had to deal with the Wuhan lab, EcoHealth Alliance, all of that. Now, what's interesting is the CREID Foundation was established in August of 2020. Now, the recipients, which you can go right up here all through this grants and funding, you can go find this. The recipients of several of this first year's 17 million grants went to Christian Anderson, Robert Gary, and Mr. Peter Daszak of the EcoHealth Alliance. Now, Donald Trump, in April, had cut funding to the EcoHealth Alliance and Peter Daszak. So Dr. Fauci, in August, decided that he would give Peter Daszak $7.5 million. Oh, in June, I'm sorry. It was June of 2020 that he received it. So it was before the CREID Foundation was actually created. He got a CREID grant back in June 17th of 2020. And interestingly, Peter Daszak's post-pandemic funding has increased 130% prior to 2019. And all this information is publicly available, guys. So let's look at Dr. Christian Anderson. Dr. Christian Anderson, his original funding back in 2019, he had about $4.5 million in grants. And then, look, as soon as the CREID Foundation came out in 2020, he went up another $9 million in combination with Robert Gary. They were granted $9 million, $4.5 million each over the course of a couple of years. Now, Robert Gary, his total, he had $5.7 million in funding before, with the additional $4.5. So now he's got a total of $9 million in funding over the next couple of years, along with Christian Anderson. Isn't that interesting that these gentlemen that claimed in a teleconference that's quoted them saying 60 to 80% sure it came from a lab. Then they give the first draft, quote unquote, to Dr. Fauci and Collins on the exact same date, February 1st, 2020. And then the final draft comes out about a month and a half later, roughly 6 weeks later, and these guys have authored it, and now it says that it came from nature. So that's highly suspicious. So a lot of that is very highly suspicious, and you have to ask those questions, and you have to look at the dates of when a lot of these grants were given to them. And some of them were back in April, May, and June. This was a few months before the CREID Foundation was actually put together. So that is very suspicious, and those questions need to be addressed. And Dr. Fauci is a great person at dodging all the questions and usually telling Rand Paul he doesn't know what he's talking about when Rand Paul grills him. Now, in Fauci's defense, Rand Paul is kind of a pushy guy and doesn't really let you answer a lot of the time. I want to play this little clip. It's about the gain of function and Fauci telling Dr. Rand Paul he doesn't know what he's talking about.
Dr. Fauci, knowing that it is a crime to lie to Congress, do you wish to retract your statement of May 11th where you claimed that the NIH never funded gain-of-function research in Wuhan?
Senator Paul, I have never lied before the Congress, and I do not retract that statement. This paper that you are referring to was judged by qualified staff up and down the chain as not being gain of function. Let me finish.
You take an animal virus and you increase its transmissibility to humans.
Right.
You're saying that's not gain of function?
Yeah, that is correct. And Senator Paul, you do not know what you are talking about, quite frankly. And I want to say that officially. You do not know what you are talking about.
And there you have it, Dr. Fauci once again being very combative and denying anything and everything. Now, my question that I would have asked him right then and there is, who was the panel of up and down the chain that authorized the paper? That would be my question. Do we have access to that? Probably not. Okay. Now, a lot of the people that conflicted with the narrative, a lot of doctors, very, very reputable doctors, were censored for this. So I'm going to click over to this really quickly. So I want to bring this up. This was Senator Ron Johnson held a panel of amazing doctors. It's like 5 hours long, the whole discussion, and it's called COVID, the Second Opinion. And there are more PhDs and years of experience in this room at this one time. It is absolutely astounding, and I recommend that you go through and take a look at some of these people. But like Dr. Peter McCulloch, amazing medical practitioner, censored by big media and big tech. Robert Malone, the same thing. Guys, and this is not even a complete list of the people that attended this conference. Now, there is another list down at the bottom, down here, of people that were invited that did not attend this conference. The director of the CDC, the acting commissioner of the FDA, Anthony Fauci, Francis Collins, the former director of the FDA. They also invited all of the CEOs of Pfizer, Moderna, Johnson & Johnson, anybody who helped develop the response or vaccines over the past 2 years, all got invited. These were the people that showed up. It's an amazing, amazing conference. Now, I can't play the whole thing because it'll instantly get taken down off YouTube, but I am going to play you the opening bit from Senator Johnson. So check this out.
Again, good morning. The U.S. recorded its first laboratory-confirmed case of COVID on January 20th, 2020, 2 years and 4 days ago. We have endured 2 years of the pandemic, and COVID-related deaths have surpassed 5.6 million globally and 889,000 in the U.S. The U.S. ranks 22nd in deaths per million at 2,575. Sweden, if you all recall, Sweden early in the pandemic was excoriated by the world press. Sweden ranks 63rd with 1,514 deaths per million. Again, the U.S. were 22nd at 2,575. Sweden is 63rd at 1,514. The human toll resulting from economic shutdowns is incalculable. The erosion of freedom and growing divisions within society, exacerbated by vaccine mandates, should concern us all. The latest variant, Omicron, is sweeping the planet as a weary public prays for it to be the last. The purpose of today's forum is to discuss the global pandemic response, the current state of knowledge regarding early and hospital treatment, vaccine efficacy and safety, what we did right, what went wrong, what should be done now, and what needs to be addressed long term. There's still much to learn about the coronavirus, COVID the disease, and COVID vaccines. Early in the pandemic, our knowledge was minimal. But even then, because of what we learned from Italy and the Princess cruise ship, it was becoming obvious COVID was a disease that targeted the old and those with certain comorbidities. Instead of using that information, public health officials pursued a one-size-fits-all response that relied heavily on creating a state of fear to ensure compliance. They also kept moving the goalposts. For example, we went from a 2-week shutdown to flatten the curve to zero COVID. From masks weren't necessary to a single mask wasn't adequate. From a vaccine that would prevent infection to a vaccine that reduced severity of the disease. And as goalposts were moving, different viewpoints were being crushed. At the very moment when outside-the-box thinking was required, the internet could have been used by practicing physicians to share their experiences as they developed effective therapies. The internet was used instead to censor discussion and vilify anyone with a different opinion. Until COVID, a fundamental principle of medicine was early detection, allowed for early treatment, which produced better results. 2 years into the pandemic, the compassionless guideline from the NIH, if you test positive, is to essentially do nothing. Go home, isolate yourself in fear, and pray you don't require hospitalization. It has also been sound medical advice when dealing with a serious illness to get a second opinion, maybe even a third. Today is about getting that long overdue second opinion.
So many of the doctors that are at this conference were censored by big tech, big media, and big pharma because they went contrary to the popular narrative that we were being told. Now, this entire conference is absolutely amazing. I'm going to leave a link in it for you below so you can check it out. Now, a lot of these guys were censored. And just recently, we've had Joe Rogan coming under a massive fire and Spotify coming under a massive fire for misinformation. And that's what these doctors were censored for. They were censored for misinformation. Now, the qualifications that these gentlemen have is absolutely amazing. And you'll just see one of them here shortly. Now, I'm not going to play any of the medical stuff from this video because I don't want this video getting censored and getting pulled down because I'm spreading misinformation. I will leave the link so you can watch the entire thing. It is absolutely phenomenal, packed with information and knowledge put forth by amazing experts from around the world. So Joe Rogan had a response to the censorship that's going on and the misinformation. And I want to play this for you very, very quickly.
The problem I have with the term misinformation, especially today, is that many of the things that we thought of as misinformation just a short while ago are now accepted as fact. Like, for instance, 8 months ago, if you said, if you get vaccinated, you can still catch COVID and you can still spread COVID, you would be removed from social media. They would ban you from certain platforms. Now, that's accepted as fact. If you said, I don't think cloth masks work, you would be banned from social media. Now, that's openly and repeatedly stated on CNN. If you said, I think it's possible that COVID-19 came from a lab, you'd be banned from many social media platforms. Now, that's on the cover of Newsweek.
So once again, Joe Rogan coming back very eloquently, stating and giving great examples of the misinformation censorship that's been completely abound. There has been no discussion allowed. I showed you the Senator Ron Johnson opening. I'm going to go through that a little bit more. I want to go back to Dr. Fauci on something, because Dr. Fauci, back in November, claimed that he was the science. And I want you to listen to what he talks about. And he's not really using the scientific method, if you listen.
Beijing acknowledges now that they don't think it originated in that market.
Well, it may not have originated in the market, but it certainly could have. I mean, I don't think that they admitted that it didn't originate in the market. I think they're saying they don't know how it originated. Yeah.
Well, there were clusters that may have been picked up and transmitted, as I understand it, through the market, but the place of origin was not within the market itself.
No, I don't think you could say that. I don't think you can say that. I think you could say we don't know how and where it originated. There are wet markets in Wuhan that are ample opportunity for a virus to jump from an animal that gets brought in from all parts of China that are very closely related physically to bat enclaves and caves and come to the market. So I don't think anyone can say that it didn't come from here or it did come from here.
You know, later in that interview, Fauci went on to say, if you criticize me, you're criticizing the science, right? Science itself, because I represent science. And it's just so funny because Fauci, what he actually represents is an extremely arrogant and highly politicized elite that has been couching its own interests as absolute truth, as science, in order to avoid scrutiny and debate, which is exactly what Fauci did in this interview. You know, and it really just goes to show you how there's so much on the right now that is sort of opposed to whatever comes out of Fauci's mouth. And we look at them with all of this disdain, but whose fault is that, right? Like, whose fault is it when people start to be suspicious of the science when the person who is supposed to represent it is so deeply politicized in this way?
Anybody who's looking at this carefully realizes that there's a distinct anti-science flavor to this. So if they get up and criticize science, nobody's going to know what they're talking about. But if they get up and really aim their bullets at Tony Fauci, well, people could recognize there's a person there, so it's easy to criticize. But they're really criticizing science because I represent science. That's dangerous. To me, that's more dangerous than the slings and the arrows that get thrown at me.
So now Dr. Fauci apparently represents all of science, which is a pretty funny statement, actually. That's not the scientific method, sir. It's not. You can go on YouTube and find an array of videos of plenty of people ripping into Dr. Fauci for stating that. Now, some of the people that you censored would disagree with you. So, Dr. Fauci, if you're listening to this, I found a really nice children's video on the scientific method, and I'm just going to play a short clip of it, and we'll take a listen to what it says about the scientific method.
The scientific method is a step-by-step way to solve problems and answer questions logically. Thanks to the scientific method, many important discoveries have been made about our world, but many unanswered questions remain. Would you like to help answer them? You can. Just remember to be scientific. Ask a question, make observations, form a hypothesis, design an experiment and test that hypothesis, analyze your data, and draw a conclusion.
So there you have it. That is the scientific method, broken down a little simple, stupid, kid style. I'll leave a link so you can watch the entire video that goes through all the steps individually. And the one thing that they leave out at the end is once you get to draw a conclusion, then you give it out to peer review so that it can be honestly judged, and everybody tries to poke holes in your conclusion. That's what you do for science. And if you find something wrong, well, then you go back a few steps and you reanalyze it. So saying that you're the science is ridiculous. That's ludicrous. Some of the gentlemen that you censored would disagree. Now, many of the gentlemen, I'm going to bring up something from the Senator Ron Johnson Second Opinion seminar. Again, we're not going to get into any of the medical stuff because I don't want this censored. I'm putting out only things that are readily available. Now, I want you to listen to this list and go back to the first section if you need to and look over that list of doctors. Many of these doctors were censored off of big media, big tech media, social media, so by big tech, by big pharma, and by the big media that we had in the last episode. I explained how the media owns it all, and they're all sponsored by Pfizer. So you can see this massive conflict of interest. And then you have Anthony Fauci as their face and spokesperson to get everything out into the front. So I want you to take a listen to this. This is a little clip from Senator Johnson kind of explaining where he first reached out to a lot of these doctors and first wanted to get this seminar together. So take a listen to this. Check this out.
I was witnessing videos being posted by other courageous doctors that were thinking outside the box and coming up with a different theory of what this disease really was. They started posting their videos, and those videos started being taken down. I signed in, but I was just listening to the flourishing of information, the sharing of different studies, completely different from what I was hearing in the mainstream media. I'm not quite sure how all these experts came together. I'm hoping to ask them if they can kind of tell us exactly how that happened. But again, I just want to thank them for being doctors, for being medical research, for being medical researchers, for being academicians that have had the courage to withstand all the criticism. Now, I do want to point out that we invited folks from the other side of the narrative, federal health agencies, their heads, or some representative from them, the CEOs or some representative from the vaccine manufacturers. They decided not to show up, which I think is somewhat telling, but also very disappointing. Now, I do have, I want to report that one individual I invited was Dr. John Raymond from the Medical College of Wisconsin. And Dr. Raymond, again, this was short notice. I don't blame him for not being able to disrupt his schedule and be able to travel here right away. But he was at least courteous enough to send me a letter, which I will enter into my own personal record on our website. I just want to read two of the 10 points that he made. The second point is what we need to do is to holistically evaluate our strengths and gaps in medicine, science, society, and policy with humility, integrity, and curiosity so that our next public health response is efficient, is seamless, and inextricably integrates decisions about human health, our economy, the needs of our communities, and the future of our children. His third point is for each of us, none excluded, to openly, honestly, and with respect and compassion explore how, where, and why the roots of division are springing up within our nation, our communities, and our institutions. I don't think there's an American that can disagree with what Dr. Raymond wrote. And I also have to say this is exactly what we are attempting to do here today. So again, I think we should start the opening statements, and we'll start with Dr. Peter McCulloch. By the way, I asked everybody to submit their bios in 75 words. Their qualifications are so extensive, it was very difficult for many of them. I apologize, I've cut them down to 75 words, but you can kind of fill in some of the gaps. But Dr. Peter McCulloch is an internist, cardiologist, epidemiologist, and a leader in the medical response of the COVID-19 disaster. He published Pathophysiological Basis and Rationale for Early Outpatient Treatment of SARS-CoV-2 Infection, the first multi-drug protocol for ambulatory patients infected with SARS-CoV-2 in the American Journal of Medicine, which he subsequently updated in reviews in cardiovascular medicine. He has more than 650 PubMed listings, 52 on COVID-19, and has commented extensively on the medical response. And again, this just barely scratches the surface of Dr. McCullough's qualifications. So, Dr. McCullough.
Now, Dr. McCullough is just an example of one of the doctors in this room. They have incredible credentials from years in the field, practicing medicine, and years of research. All these people deserve a seat at that table at the discussion without being censored by big media, pharma, or big tech. And like it was saying before on misinformation changes from day to day. And it depends on what's coming from the narrative of what is considered misinformation. Now, all the people need to sit down, start discussing this together in an open forum. All the guys from Big Pharma, all the CEOs from all the major Big Pharma companies were all invited to this conference. None of them showed. None of the members of the CDC, the FDA, Fauci, and none of them even gave a response, which is pretty telling. And in Senator Ron Johnson's words, a little disappointing. I would love to have seen some of the back and forth correspondence with a few of them coming from these doctors that they've shunned, and tried to vilify in mainstream media. It's just about the truth, and it's just about getting to the bottom of what's best and finding out the real deal with it. Now, since this has come out, since this happened, there's been a lot of emails coming out, a lot of information that's being leaked out and put out through the Freedom of Information Act. And some of this stuff is truly amazing. Now, there was a paper that was put out a little while back called the Patent Papers, and it was by Dr. Martin, and it was sort of loosely based or in addition to a paper and a lecture given by a Dr. Latham. Now, I want to click over to this. I'll show you a little bit about this article. All right. So, the Patent Papers. Now, this came out in the Citizens Journal. This is just where it was, this one specific version of it was published. Now, guys, this is an analysis of the lecture that was given. And now this is done by Joseph Mercola. And Joseph Mercola is a pretty reputable doctor, works for almost every major network, all of that. He's been on tons of different stuff. You can look up all his credentials right here. He's very reputable. So he's the one who analyzed this, this article right here, the patent papers that they were talking about. Now, the first person that I want to talk about is Jonathan Latham. And he was the one that coined the term pandemic virus industrial complex. Now, he's the gentleman. He's written in numerous medical and science journals. He's been cited over 11,000 times, like just numerous stuff. He's been very prolific during the pandemic. You can go through and research all his stuff. He is a pretty reputable person. He came up and he did a lecture and talked about something called the pandemic virus industrial complex, and putting it sort of akin to the military industrial complex and how it works. Now, I'm going to cut over to a video and let you hear from his own words, sort of his description on what it is.
In today's talk, my intention is to cast the net wider and ask questions that normally never get asked about the geopolitical context of the pandemic. What I will suggest is that there is such a thing as a pandemic virus industrial complex. This complex is not a conspiracy. Rather, like the military industrial complex, it is an interlocking set of corporations and other institutions who feed off and support each other with goods and services in a self-reinforcing way. It is an enterprise that seeks to milk public money and leverage it into private profit. It runs on your tax dollars. What is interesting and surprising is not so much that a version of the military-industrial complex would arise in the medical health sphere. It is rather that many of the participants play unexpected roles. Philanthropies are string pullers and profit centers. The Defense Department is a cash cow, but also a provocateur. Academia provides public relations, whereas nonprofits are the money launderers. These non-traditional roles are intended to confuse and camouflage the various moving parts of what is anyway a complex situation, thereby protecting the whole from scrutiny. There is therefore an important difference between the pandemic virus industrial complex and the military industrial complex. The pandemic virus industrial complex is public-facing and expected to be beneficial and transparent, whereas the military industrial complex does not really have to cope with these demands. It has no image to speak of that needs to be maintained, and it doesn't interact with organizations that themselves are sensitive to reputational damage. This requirement is in large part the explanation for these institutional complexities and non-traditional roles, academics providing PR, etc. They exist because a complex illusion has to be maintained.
So that was Dr. Jonathan Latham. That was back in January of 2021, explaining in his own words the pandemic virus industrial complex. That lecture is incredible. You should go through and take a listen to it. It will give you some incredible insight. He ties a lot of things together, and what he explains in there is that some of these companies are unwitting accomplices through what he explains. Some of the companies don't realize it. And he explains that like the nonprofits are shell companies and for laundering, and he really goes into depth about it. It's pretty incredible to listen to. And then Dr. Martin, this video was almost completely censored from mainstream media at all. You won't hear anybody talk about this. The video above, and it is 100% gone. I do have one of his lectures, a copy of one of his lectures, and I'm going to play a little part of it. I can't play the entire thing. I will leave a link to the entire lecture so that you can listen to it on your own. And I highly recommend that you go through and listen to it. Now, who is Dr. Martin? Now, Dr. Martin introduces shocking evidence that SARS-CoV-2 was man-made bioweapon in the works for decades. Now, much of his research is funded none other than the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases under the direction of Anthony Fauci. Now, what makes this gentleman so interesting and his story so interesting is that if you read this little bio right here, it says he's been in the business of tracking patent applications and approvals since 1998. And his company MCAM, which is right here, you can go check them out. They're all right here, full information, full disclosure on it. You can go through and you can check that out. Now, MCAM International Innovation Risk Management is the world's largest underwriter of intangible assets used in finance in 168 countries. So this guy's got some pretty good knowledge. MCAM has also monitored biological and chemical weapon treaties and violations on behalf of the U.S. government following the anthrax scare in September of 2001. Okay, now according to Martin, there are more than 4,000 patents relating to the SARS coronavirus. His company has also done comprehensive review of the financing of research involved in the manipulation of coronaviruses that gave rise to SARS as a subclade of the beta coronavirus family. Okay, so now this right here is the analysis by Joseph Mercola. Now this is Joseph Mercola's article on the lectures. Now, these are quotes that Joseph Mercola took down. I suggest that you read through these. There is some incredible stuff in here. And I'm going to play a clip from the opening of one of Dr. Martin's lectures. I'm just going to play the opening. I can't play the full thing. I will leave the link in there for you to watch the entire video yourself. Because the second that I put that up, this whole video will be ripped down off YouTube. So I don't want that to happen, but I do want you to be able to access that information. So I'm going to click over to that right now and check out what he's got to say.
They cannot take me and they cannot take my life. You know why? Because this is not my life. It's not mine to give. This was given to me. I'm a steward of this thing that I walk around in. And when its use by date is up, guess what? It's old milk. Throw it out. But between now and then, I'm standing for the future of this country. And I'm standing for the future of humanity. And I'm going to keep standing until my use by date. So let's get it really clear. This isn't courage. This is actually what each and every one of us has to do, which is when we are informed and we are capable of knowing the truth, it is incumbent on us to share that as far and as wide and as confidently as possible. So this is your moment of boldness, people. I'm going to give you the slide to share with the world. You're going to get the people that Ed Griffin said need to be outed. Well, they're going to be outed. Hey, before I go into the speech, I can't do a speech without pointing this out. Everybody calls me a conspiracy theorist. I'm not. I actually have done investigations into conspiracies for the last 30 years of my life. They're criminal conspiracies, and for those of you missing the point, a criminal conspiracy is defined by two or more people getting together to plan an illegal act. The slide behind me is the living proof that this was not a theory. This is a criminal conspiracy of domestic terror.
That's a heavy statement right there. Now, he has a lot of information to back up his claims. Now, I want to read you what that slide says. I can't really play much more of that video without getting this one taken down off YouTube or every other form of social media out there. Okay, I want to read you what that slide said. It says, until an infectious disease crisis is very real, present, and at an emergency threshold, it is often largely ignored. To sustain the funding base beyond the crisis, he said, we need to increase public understanding of the need for MCMs, such as pan-influenza or pan-coronavirus vaccine. A key driver is the media, and the economics follow the hype. We need to use that hype to our advantage to get to the real issues. Investors will respond if they see profit at the end of the process. Peter Daszak in 2015. Now, I do believe Peter Daszak's funding was cut by Donald Trump and then reinstated by Dr. Fauci right after it was cut. So that's suspicious. I do want to go back over to the pandemic papers for a second. I'd like to read a couple things from Dr. Joseph Mercola's analysis of his paper, of the lecture. And at the beginning it says, SARS-CoV-2 is not a novel coronavirus at all. It goes through and explains who Dr. Martin is, and he's very reputable. His company works for the government. He's worked for Fauci, the NIAID. And these are some of the quotes that Joseph Mercola pointed out. I want to read some of these to you. We took the reported gene sequence, which was reportedly isolated as a novel virus, indicated as such by the ICTV, the International Committee on Taxonomy of Viruses of the World Health Organization. We took the actual genetic sequences that were reportedly novel and reviewed those against the patent records that were available as of the spring of 2020. The next quote. And what we found, as you'll see in this report, are that over 120 patented pieces of evidence to suggest that the declaration of a novel coronavirus was actually an entire fallacy. Next quote. There was no novel coronavirus. There are countless very subtle modifications of coronavirus sequences that have been uploaded, but there was no single identified novel coronavirus at all. Next quote. As a matter of fact, we found records in the patent records of sequences attributed to novelty going to patents that were sought as early as 1999. So not only was this not a novel anything, this has not been novel for over 2 decades. It's interesting, these quotes that he's pulled out. And this is Dr. Mercola that pulled these out of this, So this is not me. I'm just reading what he's saying here. Now, the spike protein vaccine for the coronavirus patented 22 years ago. Okay, some of the quotes. And it gives it's giving the patent numbers for everything here, where it says, okay, up until 1999, coronavirus patents were all in the veterinary sciences. The first coronavirus vaccine to use the S spike protein was patented by Pfizer in January 2000, patent number 6372224. It was a spike protein virus vaccine for canine coronavirus. You can look up the actual patents for yourself in the U.S. Patent Trademark Office's website. Now, a couple of the quotes out of this section is Ralph Barrick, who worked for University of Chapel Hill, worked on rabbit cardiorhythmiopathy. I'm not sure what this is. And then canine coronavirus in Pfizer's work to identify how to develop S spike protein vaccine target candidates, give rise to the obvious evidence that neither the coronavirus concept of the vaccine nor the principle of the coronavirus itself as a pathogen of interest with respect to the spike protein's behavior is anything novel at all. As a matter of fact, it's 22 years old based on patent filings, Martin says. So that's pretty interesting. And then it gets into the development from the HIV vaccine, which is a little interesting because from the HIV vaccine development of COVID-19. And according to Martin, Fauci and the NIAID found the malleability of the coronavirus to be a potential candidate for HIV vaccines. In the 1999 Fauci funded research at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, where Barrick's lab was, to create an infectious replication defective coronavirus, specifically targeted for human lung epithelium. The patent for the replication defective coronavirus that attacks human lung cells was filed April 19th, 2002, patent number 7279327. In other words, we made SARS, Martin says. Or perhaps, more accurately, Fauci and the UNC did. Several months after that patent filing, the SARS outbreak occurred in Asia. These are very compelling. Now, the other thing that I wanted to add on this HIV vaccine development is that it's very interesting, because if you look over here in Time magazine, in October 24th, 2019, find out that NIH and the Gates Foundation pledged $200 million to bringing gene therapies to patients who need them most. Interesting. Both HIV and sickle cell disease. Now this article right here goes much more into that. And it's very interesting that this came up at the end of 2019, right before it came out, and that all this research has research into the current vaccines. It's just an interesting coincidence. Does it mean anything? I don't know. Possibly. Let's continue on back with the patent papers. I just wanted to make that little connection there. Now, the coronavirus is a biological weapon candidate. That I'm not going to read. I'll let you guys read this. But it also says that the CDC holds the patents on SARS coronavirus. Holds many patents on it. And then we get down into Sequoia Pharmaceuticals, down towards the bottom, where it says April 28th, 2003, 3 days after the CDC filed its patents for the SARS coronavirus, Sequoia Pharmaceuticals filed a patent on an antiviral agent for the treatment and control of the infectious coronavirus, patent 7151163. So the CDC files a patent on SARS coronavirus, and 3 days later, there's a treatment. That's also a very interesting coincidence. Now, in Dr. Martin's lecture, he goes over some incredible connections. He goes over some amazing connections. Now, I want to read the bottom of this very quickly. And it says, the pandemic virus industrial complex is swimming in profits. Barrick is one of the few people who has profited significantly from the pandemic, which he appears to have been part of creating. Another is Fauci. The same drug companies that hold the patents on the not-so-novel SARS-CoV-2 feature to also be raking in profits from their COVID shots. In 2015, Dr. Peter Daszak, head of the EcoHealth Alliance, funneled research dollars from the NIAID into the Wuhan Institute of Technology for coronavirus research. It's promoted the official narrative of the SARS-CoV-2 is natural origin stated. Yes. And I read that quote to you earlier. So it is all very interesting. In where do we go from here? The new normal. Oh, this is the other part that I wanted to read to you. The new normal was coined by Merck back in 2004 bioterrorism conference. So, yes, can we get back to the new normal? Let me read this to you. The more we learn, the grimmer it gets. Clearly, plans for our current day predicament were laid out well over a decade ago, according to Martin. The slogan, the new normal, was coined by Merck during a January 6, 2004 conference called SARS and Bioterrorism, Emerging Infectious Diseases, Antimicrobial Therapeutics, and Immune Modulators. The term has now become branded campaign adopted by the WHO and the Global Preparedness Monitoring Board and the rest of the pandemic virus industrial complex. Incidentally, Fauci is on the board of directors of the Global Preparedness Monitoring Board, as well as Dr. Chris Elias, the president of the Global Development Program at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and Dr. George Fugao, PhD, Director General of the Chinese CDC and Chinese Communist Party member. It's very interesting. And this whole interview and video is a little bit long, but it is well worth the read. And he's also published a 205-page paper detailing Dr. Fauci's involvement in all of this. And it's available on archive.org, but have no fear. I already grabbed that for you. It's right here, and I'm going to leave you the link for it. And this is absolutely mind-blowing, this read. Now, let's just look at the table of contents. Funding and conspiracy to commit acts of terror, acts of domestic terrorism resulting in the death of American citizens, lying to Congress, conspiracy to criminal commercial activity, market manipulation and allocation, interlocking directorates, disclosure of government interests, illegal clinical trials, and the commercial actors. This thing goes way deep, and it's got patent numbers and government documents and everything you could ask for. And as he says at the beginning of the lecture that he's about to give, is he gets called a conspiracy theorist. However, his company for 30 years has been investigating criminal conspiracies, and he works for the government and has for 30 years. So, I mean, take what you want from it. I mean, I'm not telling you what to do medically. I'm not telling you what, I'm not a doctor. I just look at information. And at the beginning of this, we were just looking to see if it was a lab leak or by nature. And the evidence is fairly overwhelming in the favor of lab. Now, all the other evidence, that obviously goes to a far deeper sort of conspiracy, which I hate to use that word, but I mean, the military-industrial complex is a very real thing that we use in everyday wording. You know, is it so strange that the pandemic virus industrial complex is anything different? I mean, you look at the narrative that we've been given. Look at the contradictions that have come from up top. And I played you the Joe Rogan clip on what has become misinformation. What is misinformation one day becomes spouted as fact the next day. So I'm not here to tell you what to do. I just like to look at facts. I always have questions. And that is what we do here at this channel, is we question. A lot of questions. And I try to go forward and find as many facts as I can. I try to find the most reputable sources that I can. But I also like to look outside the box and see what's not being told in the narrative. Now, a lot of this stuff, guys, some of it was on mainstream media. I pulled some of it from there. I pulled some of it from outside sources. Guys, there are going to be links in the description below to everything I went over in this entire video. I know it was a long ride. I hope we at least I think we got to the bottom of lab versus nature at least. I think there's overwhelming evidence that it came from a lab. Again, I'm not a medical doctor. I don't understand half of the stuff that I read in all of my research in doing this. But I do believe that there's doctors out there that need to take a look at all of this. And I believe that that table needs to be open in an open discussion with all people present. You know, we need to get big pharma. We need to get government reps from the FDA, the CDC, and we need to get doctors that are out in the field doing this. And they need to sit down at a nice round table like Senator Ron Johnson tried to do. And they need to have this discussion. It needs to be brought out. We as a world need to know this. As a people, we deserve to know this. Now, speaking of we the people and as a people, and I'm not just saying we the people as in me from the United States, this is far bigger than all of us. This is a worldwide thing. And I'm going to close out tonight with a little clip from Dr. Martin. It's in fact his closer. And I think it's very relevant to all of us. And I don't think there's anything in there that would be objectionable to the censors at B. Now, guys, I hope you like this sort of stuff. If you do, like, subscribe, share this with your friends, spread the news, because here, guys, at G on What? We will see you next time.
I'm going to jump over this. I'm only going to call these intolerable acts. And once again, all these presentations you're going to have, so don't worry about me jumping past the slides because I'm watching the time. All the intolerable acts are exactly what they are. They are intolerable acts because when we started this country, there were 4 intolerable acts, primarily centered around the blockade of the harbor of Boston. And that was the thing that really pissed us off, right? We were sick and tired of King George doing a lot of things, but when he blocked commerce and trade, we were like, that's enough, okay? And we had 4 intolerable acts. One of them was being able to march into your house and take quarter in your house if you were a soldier and all that kind of stuff. We didn't like that either. But the big one was the economic blockade, which leads me to this. What's the cure? The cure is we the people have failed. And by that, I mean we, the people, and I'm putting me in the middle of it. We actually made the mistake of thinking that somehow or another, by being pissed off at something, that justified us taking an action. And here's the tiny problem. When you justify your action by being pissed off at something, you're giving the thing power. Okay? We, the people, need to actually take responsibility for us, the people, now. Not wait for some permission, not wait for some egregious act, not wait for something else. We, the people, actually need to do something. And what we're going to do is I'm going to walk you quickly through these, and I'm going to end with the best punchline ever. Rather than actually reciting things that say we're pissed off at the world, we need to actually say what it means to be human. So, for example, by nature, we are provisioned for life, liberty, livelihood unrestricted from provisioning, meaning that we have the access to do and engage with a world that is abundant and generative and full of life aligned for life. That's what we are. Number 2, we are at liberty to peacefully assemble, speak, disagree, express, believe, and choose. We are at liberty to be interactive beings. That's what we are. Not getting permission from this. People, these are not rights. They cannot be granted. This is the essential nature of the human condition. And the minute we actually say we have the right to it, we've already subordinated ourselves. So stop subordinating yourself and take your inalienable condition and claim it as your own. Number 3, freedom of inquiry with assurance of veracity and provenance. What does that mean? That means we're not free to speak a lie. Did you hear what I said? We're not free to speak a lie. We're not free to recite propaganda. In fact, we're explicitly prohibited from doing that. My word better be true. Your word better be true. And does that mean that it contained all truth? No, but it better be my true statement and your true statement, because if you're reciting something, if you're a ventriloquist for somebody else's initiative, you've violated an essential nature of what it means to be human. You do not speak for, you speak. And your speech is true, and it comes from you. And if it doesn't, you don't say it. How about that? There's an interesting way to go. We're at liberty to exchange value and economics and commerce with transparency. In other words, we don't have to go through a taxable system. We don't have to go through a fiat system. We have to go through a system where we account for all the inputs and all the outputs, and we agree. When we sit together, we agree that value is represented and has been transferred. We do not need a fiat. We do not need a blockchain. We do not need an intermediary. We need to engage in the exchange of value, and we need to put that in our founding documents so that we never lose the ability to engage in free and open commerce, ever, for any reason. We should be afforded access to the derivatives of all public goods, meaning if we paid for it as a society, we should be able to benefit from it without restriction. Meaning that the airwaves, the bandwidth, the fiber, the FCC communications, whatever it is, if we paid for it as a public, we own it as a public, and that means we use it as a public. And last but not least, we are organically undefiled from birth to death. Now, many of you think that I mean injections or ingestion. That's not what I mean. I mean those two things, but I mean the third and more important and most important of all. We have the right to make sure that what goes into our ears does not defile us. We have the right to make sure that we are exposed to frequencies of truth, integrity, harmony with life, harmony with the universe, harmony with the ability to be human. And we are entitled to that by virtue of our existence.